It was supposed to be a normal meeting, but when Daniel stepped into the conference room that morning, he knew something was wrong that no one would look him in the eye. People he had worked beside for years, people he had stayed late with, helped, covered for, were now shifting in their seats, whispering into their hands, pretending not to notice him. The air felt heavy. The kind of heaviness you feel before a storm you can't outrun. At the front of the room, Mr. Keaton, the man who had once promised Daniel a future here, stood with a sheet of paper in his hand, face tight, eyes cold. He didn't smile. He didn't ask Daniel to sit. He just read the words from the paper. Daniel Cross, due to your failure on Project Eden and the damage it has caused this company, you are hereby terminated. Effective immediately. A few gasps, a few phones raised, pretending to check messages, but really recording. Daniel couldn't move. His mind tried to catch up to what his ears had heard. Failure? He had saved Project Eden, stayed up nights to keep it alive, worked when others had given up. He opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Keaton held up a hand. No discussion. Gather your things. You have 5 minutes. It wasn't just a firing. It was a public execution. As Daniel turned, the room split apart like a river around a stone. Eyes followed him. Whispers grew louder. Some were laughing. His hands trembled as he walked. Past the team he had built. Past the faces that had once cheered him on. At the door, he almost stumbled. And that's when he felt a hand brush against his Mr. Blake, the janitor, quiet, steady, always there. He pressed something small into Daniel's palm, a folded piece of paper. No words. No glance. Just a nod. Daniel closed his fingers around it without thinking. As he stepped out into the hallway, away from the company he had given everything to, away from the laughter and the shame. He opened his hand and looked at the note. There were just 3 words. Storage room B. Midnight. The door clicked shut behind him. Daniel stood alone in the hallway. The sounds of muffled laughter still leaking through the walls. His breath came out in short, shaky bursts. He looked down at his hand. The paper was crumpled now from how tightly he had been holding it. Slowly, he peeled it open. 3 words. Storage room B. Midnight. His fingers tightened. He looked back once at the conference room door, half expecting someone to follow him. No one came. The cold air from the parking lot slapped his face as he stepped outside. He didn't even have his jacket. They hadn't given him time to grab it. Daniel stood there for a moment, paper in hand, watching the people inside through the glass windows, watching them laugh, shake hands, move on. As if he had never been there. As if he had never mattered. A gust of wind tore the paper from his fingers. He chased it down, gripping it tighter this time, folding it and slipping it into his pocket. He didn't know what storage room B meant. He didn't know why Mr. Blake had given it to him, but something deep inside him, something tired and angry, told him to hold on to it. Daniel started walking. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even have a job anymore. His car sat alone in the lot, a thin layer of dust on the windshield. He climbed inside and slammed the door harder than he needed to. The silence was thick. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring ahead, heart pounding. How did it come to this? How could they turn on me? He thought back to the early days, the long nights, the endless deadlines, the promises. We're a family here, they had said. He had believed them. He had given them everything. Birthdays missed, weekends traded for meetings, vacations canceled. It was supposed to mean something, that he was supposed to matter. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he picked it up. A text from Jenna, an old co-worker. I'm so sorry. HR sent out an email. You've been blacklisted from the industry. Daniel blinked. Read it again. Blacklisted. It didn't even seem real. 1 meeting, 1 lie, and now no job, no future. His throat tightened. His hands shook. He could feel the walls closing in. He thought about calling someone. Anyone. But who? No one had stood up for him. No one had even looked at him. His phone buzzed again. A second text. They're saying you sabotaged Eden on purpose, that you sold them out. He dropped the phone onto the seat. It felt like falling through ice. No way to swim back to the surface. No way to breathe. He sat there, staring out at the darkening sky, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Storage room B. Midnight. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a cruel joke. Maybe they would laugh at him one more time when he showed up. but he was already drowning. And if there was even a small chance that paper meant something, he had to find out. Because if he didn't, there would be nothing left to fight for. Daniel's heart races as he pushes the heavy door open. The air inside the storage room smells stale, like it hasn't been disturbed in years. The only light comes from the broken flicker of a single bulb overhead. The room is filled with old filing cabinets and boxes, piles of forgotten things, records, old office furniture, unimportant scraps. But Daniel isn't here for any of that. His eyes scan, desperate, until they land on a box at the back of the room. It's marked in bold black letters, Project Eden, confidential. His hands shake as he pulls the box from the stack. He tears it open. Inside, a stack of papers, a few folders, and a slim laptop. He flips through them quickly, each page more damning than the last. He sees his name, not as the author, not as the creator, but buried in the fine print. Emails, memos, contracts, all leading to one conclusion. They took everything from him. Project Eden, his idea, his vision, but the leadership erased him. His contributions wiped clean, his name replaced with others. People who had never even worked on it. The pain is sharp. He can almost hear the laughter from that morning, the CEO's cold words echoing. In his mind, "You're a disgrace to this company." Daniel slams the folder shut, his breath heavy. They built their success on his stolen work. All of it. Every award, every praise, every dollar. A chill runs through him, not from the cold in the room, but from the weight of what this means. The air seems to thicken. His fingers tremble as he flips through more pages. There, on the back of a memo, an email from a leadership executive. The merger based on Project Eden will secure our future. It hits him like a slap to the face. They were planning a merger, a huge one, all based on something that wasn't theirs. Everything he had ever done, everything he had ever sacrificed, had been stolen. And now it was being turned into a deal that would make them millions. While he stood on the outside, invisible, the realization is gut-wrenching. The betrayal is total. Daniel's hands tighten into fists. This wasn't just business. This was personal. And that's when he knows. The fight isn't over. Not by a long shot. Daniel doesn't remember when the weight of everything started to crush him. It didn't happen all at once, but it might as well have. It began with a call, a single sentence that set it all in motion. "You're out." But that wasn't the end. No, the real pain came slowly, in waves. The job rejections came first, one after another. They all started with the same polite words. "We regret to inform you." And then the silence. The kind of silence that eats away at your confidence. That whispers, "You're not enough." Daniel couldn't even remember the last time someone asked to hear his side. It didn't matter anyway. They had blacklisted him. His name didn't just disappear from their systems. It vanished from the entire industry. He didn't belong anymore. The bills kept coming. Even when he ignored them, they found him. They piled up on the kitchen table, reminders that there were things in the world he couldn't escape. The red ink bled through his mind. Past due, past due, past due. The worst part? They didn't care. The electric company didn't care. The landlord didn't care. Every call from a creditor felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that he was a man with no future. He could almost hear them laughing on the other side of the line. "Good luck, Daniel," they'd say, just before hanging up. And then there were the eviction notices. The first one slipped under his door like a piece of paper, cold and impersonal. But the message was clear. His rent wasn't just late, it was overdue by months. He had no choice but to pack his things. There was no place for him here anymore. The reality settled in. He was losing everything. Friends, the ones who once stood by him, turned their backs, too. The messages got shorter, colder. It was as if he no longer existed in their world. His phone buzzed with another text. "Sorry, man. I can't help." Another. "Don't take it personally. Things are rough for all of us." He couldn't even get angry. He didn't have the energy. They weren't wrong, but it didn't make the pain sting any less. One by one, they all faded away, until it was just him, alone in this crumbling apartment. And in that darkness, in the silence of his failure, Daniel sat. He wasn't crying anymore. There were no more tears to shed. His hands were shaking not from grief, but from something deeper, something colder. Anger, the kind that doesn't scream or lash out. The kind that simmers quietly beneath the surface. slowly turning everything it touches into something darker. Then he opened the documents again. The stolen work. The proof of what they had done to him. And his eyes fell on one small detail, one line buried in an email chain. Upcoming merger. Based on Project Eden. The words burned into him. Merger. A word that meant nothing to the people at the top, but everything to Daniel. They were going to profit from his idea, from his work, and it would cost him everything. His career, his future, and they were about to become richer than ever because of it. But Daniel wasn't about to let them win. The rage inside him was silent, calculated. He wasn't going to scream or break anything. He wasn't going to fight with his fists. No, this was something else. This was war, but the kind you fight with your mind, not your body. The kind of revenge that would be slow, and it would be cold. The pieces started falling into place. The merger, the stolen project. They thought they could bury him, erase him from the story, but they didn't know Daniel. And now, he had something they didn't. He had the truth. They were going to pay for this. Every single one of them. There were no celebrations, no congratulatory texts or cheers, no parties thrown for his first win. There was only silence. The kind that comes from knowing you're doing something no one can see, but everyone will feel. Daniel woke up early every day, just to fall into a routine so monotonous, so calculated, that it became his escape. Work, study, work again. The hum of the dishwasher, the scrape of plates, it all felt the same, and that's exactly what he needed. He needed to erase the noise in his head, the constant replay of the meeting, the echoes of that one sentence that crushed everything. You're a disgrace. He found a strange solace in washing dishes. It was the only time when his thoughts weren't consumed by the anger and betrayal. The gloves were too tight, but he wore them anyway. It was as if the grime on his hands reflected the state of his life. Dirty, tarnished, and hard to wash off. But this was his new reality, and there was no room for luxury, no room for pride. Daniel learned quickly. Every night, after his shifts, after scrubbing, after cleaning, he would sit alone in his tiny apartment, his laptop glowing in front of him. He read, studied, and absorbed the world that had previously been out of his reach. Business law, corporate strategy, patent laws, the legal tools of war. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was his only option. He had no one to lean on. He couldn't afford mistakes. With every page he turned, every course he finished, Daniel built something new, something that wasn't visible to anyone else. The old version of him, the one who once trusted people, who once believed in loyalty, was gone. He was replaced by someone colder, more calculated, someone who didn't rely on others, but instead took control of everything he could. Money was tight, barely enough to pay rent, but still, he saved. He didn't let himself buy anything beyond the essentials. Each dollar was carefully hoarded. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep moving forward. Enough to make sure no one could see the storm that was coming. Then, one day, it happened. The moment he had been waiting for. He'd saved just enough to file for ownership. The paperwork wasn't complicated, but the steps were precise. Daniel filled out every form, every signature, every clause. He knew what it meant. This wasn't just about money. It was about ownership, about taking back what was his, what had been stolen from him. And then, one day, weeks later, he saw it. The patent office had granted him full ownership of Project. Eden.it wasn't a big moment. There was no applause. No one noticed. It wasn't news. It wasn't even a victory. It was a quiet moment in an alleyway as he held up his phone to confirm it. His fist clenched in the dark. But he didn't smile. He didn't even feel relief. It was just another step. Another brick in the wall. He was slowly, steadily, building. The people who had wronged him, they had no idea. But they would soon. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried him. But Daniel had learned the game. And now, he was playing by his own rules. There was no going back now. The seed had been planted, and it would grow silently in the shadows. In the silence of his cramped apartment, Daniel typed the final words of his email, his fingers moving like a machine. He paused only for a second before pressing send. It wasn't the kind of email anyone would notice immediately. Just a few words, a few lines on a screen. But the impact of those lines, it would send shockwaves. He had planned this carefully, calculated every moment, every word. He hadn't spent months learning the laws of business just to throw it all away for a small win. This was bigger, much bigger, Daniel wasn't going to throw away his chance for revenge in a fit of rage. No, he had learned that the hard way. This had to be precise. The rival company, Weston Capital, was the perfect target. Cold, calculating, driven by profit. It was a simple transaction, a clean deal. They wanted Eden, and Daniel would deliver it. Legally, cleanly. They'd never even know he was involved that he didn't call them. He didn't meet with them. There was no handshake or lingering eye contact. No, Daniel worked from the shadows, from the dark. All communication was done remotely, through encrypted channels. His name? Not anywhere in sight. Only numbers, only facts, only the value of what he had. The offer? Eden Technology, the game-changing project that everyone thought belonged to Weston's leadership. Now it was in the hands of Weston's competitors, but no one would know how it got there. How a single email, a single act of quiet manipulation, had shifted the power. The next few days were a blur of cold, calculated exchanges. He watched from his computer screen as the negotiations played out behind tinted glass. Weston's representatives, dressed in dark suits, sat across from the anonymous entity that had reached out to them. Their voices were smooth, polite, but the tension was thick in the air. They thought they had won before. They thought their success was inevitable, but with every document signed, with every agreement made, they had walked right into his hands. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel had placed the pieces just where they needed to go, and then the announcement came. Weston Capital was moving forward with a hostile takeover of his old company. The stock market didn't see it coming. Shares in his former company plummeted like a stone. The panic spread like wildfire in the boardroom. Whispers turned into phone calls. Executives rushed in and out of meetings. There was confusion. There was chaos. And most importantly, there was fear. Daniel's old company had been built on the shoulders of stolen ideas, and now those ideas had come back to haunt them. Daniel watched it all unfold from his small, dimly lit room. There were no celebrations, no cheers, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every move he made, every word he whispered in the dark, had led to this moment. Weston Capital thought they had found a gold mine, but they had walked right into a trap. And his old company? It was crumbling beneath them, like a foundation built on sand. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something stir in him. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something colder, something more calculated. This was just the beginning. The ripples had started. The storm had begun, and there was no going back now. The company that had destroyed his career, it was on the verge of collapse. But Daniel wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The first whispers came quietly, barely noticeable at first. A few conversations in the break room, a half-heard sentence in the hallway. But those whispers grew. They always do. When something's off, when people are hiding something, the cracks begin to show. No one could see it yet, but Daniel did. He had always been able to sense when something was wrong. He'd lived through the storm before, felt the undercurrents, seen how it all worked. And right now, he was watching his old company, his former life, fall apart. Not with a bang, not with a loud scream, but with a slow, inevitable collapse. The rumors started to spread faster than anyone expected. The whispers that were once just rumors became accusations. The missing documents, the internal corruption, the questions about how a once successful company had gone off track. No one knew who was behind it, but it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. The CEO, once the face of success, now paced frantically behind closed doors. The empire he'd built on borrowed ideas, on stolen projects, was falling apart piece by piece. Investigations were launched. He called in the best auditors, the smartest minds, all to trace what had gone wrong, all to find what had been taken. The more they searched, the more they dug, the deeper the cracks spread. Inside the boardroom, panic started to set in. People pointed fingers. The CEO started making calls, trying to cover up what he couldn't control. He wasn't just worried about losing his company. He was worried about losing everything. His reputation, his career, his power, his influence. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. But Daniel didn't care about any of that. He didn't care about the drama unfolding, the scrambling at the top. He didn't need to be a part of the chaos. He wasn't even interested in watching them suffer, at least not directly. He wasn't going to storm in with a triumphant speech or make a grand reveal. No, he'd already won. Everything that happened now was just the natural outcome of what he'd set in motion. Daniel sat in the shadows, a distant observer. No contact, no warnings, no moving pieces on his end. He didn't need to lift a finger. He'd built his plan with such precision that watching it unfold was like seeing the final moments of a chess game. He had already moved the king, already set the board. All that was left was watching the collapse, but he saw the headlines. The leaks. The investigations that were getting worse by the hour. People in the company began to panic. As the pressure mounted, the internal chaos spread. Those once loyal employees started to ask questions. The people who had once thought of themselves as untouchable were now scrambling to save their jobs, their positions, their dignity. The CEO, who had once spoken so confidently about the future, now found himself backed into a corner. He was being cornered by his own mistakes, his own choices, and by the empire of lies he'd built. The board members had their own problems to handle, their own faces to save. No one had any answers, and the fear of what might come next hung over them like a thick fog. Daniel watched it all unfold, feeling no satisfaction, no joy. He didn't need the satisfaction. He had set his plan in motion. He had taken what was his. The company that had once claimed his ideas as their own was falling apart, piece by piece. But the real beauty of it, they were doing it to themselves. All he had to do was stand back and let the cards fall. He had pulled the final card from the tower, and now it was all coming down. Slowly, methodically, each move they made, each desperate attempt to hold it together, only made the collapse inevitable. The cracks deepened, and soon, there would be nothing left but the wreckage of what once was. There were no cheers, no applause. There didn't need to be. The power of the moment wasn't in the destruction, it was in the silence, the calm that followed a storm. And Daniel, from his quiet distance, knew that he had achieved something few could ever claim. He had brought them down without lifting a finger. The call came quietly. A private meeting, no cameras, no audience. Just the kind of meeting Daniel had been waiting for. The kind of meeting that wasn't about negotiation, but about something far more important: control. The company had seen the writing on the wall. Their empire was crumbling, piece by piece, and now they had to face the person who had set it all in motion. But there was no longer any room for discussion. No space for apologies. Daniel arrived early. His footsteps echoed in the empty halls, the sound crisp against the silence of the building. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, every step measured. The same building he had once been a part of now felt alien to him, like an old memory that no longer held any meaning. And yet, he stood at its very heart, waiting. When the door to the meeting room opened, he entered without a word. His suit was immaculate, tailored, sharp. Every detail about him exuded quiet power. No grand gestures, no need for a speech. He wasn't here to make a statement. He was here to finish what had been started long ago, to take back what was his, and to end this chapter once and for all. The CEO sat at the table, his face pale, his usual composure now shattered. He was nervous, fumbling with papers in front of him, trying to gather his thoughts. But there was no strength in his movements anymore, no arrogance. He could feel it, the pressure mounting. He had no choice but to try and make peace with the person he had wronged. His words came in quick bursts, almost desperate. Apologies, excuses, empty promises. Daniel, we've made mistakes. I know that now. But this doesn't have to be the end. We can fix this. We can make it right. I'm offering you a VP position, a chance to be part of this company. Again, please, let's just. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't need to respond to the empty words. The truth was already laid out in front of them both. And now, it was time to end this. Without a word, Daniel reached into his briefcase. His fingers, calm and steady, slid the original stolen documents across the table. The papers, once lost to him, were now the very weapon that would end this. He didn't look at the CEO. He didn't need to die. He just said 6 words. Simple, final, and enough to make the man's blood run cold. You will resign by tonight. The room fell silent. The weight of those words lingered in the air. The CEO's face drained of color. His eyes darted to the documents, to the undeniable proof of what had been stolen from Daniel. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The apology he had been rehearsing for days now felt hollow. Too little, too late. Daniel stood. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need to hear the excuses. He didn't need anything more from this man. His part in this story was over. All that remained was the end. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. There was no drama, no confrontation, just the quiet certainty of someone who had won. And then, without warning, the CEO was forced to face the consequences of his actions. Hours later, in front of the entire company, he resigned. The announcement was brief, public, unceremonious. His fall from grace was complete. His power, once so absolute, had crumbled beneath the weight of his own greed. And Daniel? He didn't. Look back. The company that had once betrayed him now watched as its leader, the man who had stolen everything, walked away in defeat. There were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet understanding of what had just transpired. Daniel had won without ever raising his voice. The room buzzed with whispers, but Daniel was long gone. The real power had shifted, and the consequences had already been set in motion. He had taken back control, not through violence, not through anger, but through precision, through patience, through the quiet power of knowing exactly when to act. And now, the CEO's empire was just another ruin, another cautionary tale. Daniel had rewritten the rules of this game, and there was no going back. The company would never be the same again. Neither would the people who had once thought they were untouchable. Daniel hadn't forgotten Mr. Blake, the janitor who, without saying a word, had handed him the paper that set everything in motion. It had been a small gesture, one that most people would have overlooked. But for Daniel, it had been the first sign that someone, somewhere, had seen the truth. He entered the janitor's small apartment, quiet and unassuming, just like the man who lived there. Mr. Blake, now retired, sat at a worn-out kitchen table, a faint trace of years lived in the lines of his face. His life had never been about the grandiose. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need thanks. But Daniel had always known that what he had done for him wasn't something that could be forgotten. Daniel placed an envelope on the table. The light in Mr. Blake's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but he said nothing. The man didn't speak much, never had. But Daniel understood. He didn't need to explain anything. The envelope was all the answer needed. Inside was a check, enough money to last Mr. Blake the rest of his life, enough to retire without worrying about bills or work or anything, enough to let him live the peace that he had earned. Mr. Blake looked at the check, his eyes glistening, but his hands didn't tremble. He'd never been the type for thanks, and Daniel knew that. They didn't need words between them. What was in that envelope wasn't just money, it was gratitude. It was respect. The two men didn't exchange pleasantries, no flowery words of gratitude. They didn't need them. Instead, they shared a firm handshake, one that lasted just a moment longer than expected, as if both of them understood that this gesture meant more than any 1,000 words ever could. Daniel stood up, ready to leave. But before he walked out, he looked back at Mr. Blake, sitting at that same table where it had all begun. And for just a brief moment, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the struggle, the long fight for what was his, seemed to lift. The circle had closed. The janitor's small act of kindness had set a course in motion that had unraveled the empire. But now, it was time to move on. And Daniel had learned the truth, that no victory was truly earned alone. Sometimes, the smallest gestures were the ones that mattered most. Now, it's your turn. What would you do if you had the chance to take back what was rightfully yours? Would you rise from the ashes, or let the world decide your fate? Drop a comment below and let us know how you would handle betrayal. Share your thoughts. Your own story might just be the next chapter. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share if you felt the power of Daniel's journey. The fight isn't over. It's only just begun.